You're now tuned into the fourth season of Atypical Voices in Our Time, the official podcast of Chemistry Productions, a media education company. Let's get it started.
That's AVIOT.
Hey, what's going on, y'all? It is Jay Stokes of the AVIOT podcast. Nice to be with you all once again. It's been a little minute. I'm not even going to get into why, but I'm just happy to be back recording on this podcast episode right here. So, there's been a lot in the news. We're going to cover some on this episode right here. The next podcast episode later on this week, we'll cover some more of what's going on. But I wanted to start first by revisiting an old topic that I first introduced on a past AVIOT Sunday Brew. For those of you who don't know, AVIOT Sunday Brew is when we have the podcast on live on YouTube Live, and we have discussions with different people who come through in the chat. There are a lot of trolls that come through. I'm not a fan of that. I would like to have more productive conversations. Sometimes we have productive conversations depending on the week, but different people come in and out. We have some regulars, but for the most part, I see different audience members each week on there. But the topic that I wanted to talk about was Jillian Michaels. She was a former, I think, trainer on The Biggest Loser. It was a show that dealt with weight loss back in the day. And she was on CNN with Abby Phillips and other panelists. And she was making some very controversial remarks toward American slavery. I'm actually trying to pull it up right now, what she said.
You cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does. But let's talk about the fact that when you look at slavery, let's talk about the fact.
Slavery in America was.
Do you realize that only less than 2% of white Americans owned slaves?
But it was a system of white supremacy.
You realize that slavery is thousands of years old?
White people were
Do you know
slave
who
owners.
was the first race to try to end slavery? Well, what's controversial?
I'm very surprised.
This is an extraordinary exercise in historical revisionism.
I'm really surprised.
Do you realize that?
Jillian, I'm surprised that you're trying to litigate who was the beneficiary of slavery and
I'm
who
not.
was not.
What I'm trying to tell you is that
in the context of American history,
Okay.
what are you saying is incorrect by saying that it was white people oppressing black people?
Every single thing is like, oh, no, this is all because white people bad.
But she said that you cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit in the Smithsonian does. So the whole topic of conversation was the current president of the United States trying to remove information regarding slavery in America from Smithsonian exhibits. So that's a big deal. You're trying to rewrite history. You're trying to do away with the parts of American history that you don't want. Slavery happened. Black people were enslaved in America. That is just what happened. You can't remove that no matter how much you try to scratch it out. What I notice is when I talk about this topic too on AVIOT Sunday Brew, that live show, people get very defensive in the comment section. They don't like to talk about slavery. They say you got to get over it. My thing is people, black folks specifically, are still dealing with the aftermath of the American slave trade today in a negative way. So no, there's no getting over it. If you tell us to get over the Holocaust, if you tell us we can't get over the Holocaust, if you tell us we can't get over 9/11, we can't get over slavery. We literally have the descendants, me included, of people who were enslaved still walking around alive today. I can literally trace my lineage back to American slavery, and I'm not too far out. I knew my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother was born in the early 1900s, meaning that she was probably 2 generations out of slavery. All right? So it wasn't that long ago. Civil rights movement was literally, in the 1960s? That's not too long ago either. Come on, 1950s, 1960s. So there's that. But anyways, so Jillian Michaels had gone on to talk about, do you know that only less than 2% of white Americans own slaves? She was talking a bunch of nonsense. And Abby Phillips, the host of this specific show on CNN, I think the show was called Newsnight, she was pushing back against Jillian Michaels as well as other people on during the show. And one thing, this led to a lot of conversations that were that people chose to go into offline, and it was a big deal. One of the individuals who chose to address this situation, she's actually the author of the 1619 Project. I'm looking it up right now. The 1619 Project specifically aims to reframe American history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the center of the national narrative. Nicole Hannah-Jones is the author of the 1619 Project. She actually put out a video saying how it's dangerous to try and downplay slavery in American history. And she was talking about, yeah, you want to say that around 2% of white Americans owned enslaved black people, and really it was more than that. But think about it in the context of these 2%, these alleged 2% of white Americans were some of the most powerful Americans in the country.
Let's take the fewer than 2% of white people owned slaves at face value, though we know that number is technically incorrect. And let's apply that standard to any other industry. What percentage of Americans own social media companies or technology companies such as Apple? It's a tiny percentage. I'm doubtful if it's even 1% of Americans. And yet no one would credibly argue that social media companies are not ubiquitous across American life, that they don't play a major influence on our political, social, and economic life in America. And in fact, what we know is that more than 70% of Americans use social media, though hardly any Americans own social media platforms. Before 1865, the end of slavery in the United States, 63% of U.S. presidents had been slave owners at some point in their lives. More than 1,800 members of Congress owned slaves, meaning between 1789 and 1819, more than half of the men elected to Congress each session were slave owners. What about the Supreme Court? 26 of this nation's first 30 Supreme Court justices were enslavers, and about half of all the Supreme Court justices before the Civil War were enslavers. So many Supreme Court justices were enslavers that if we added up all the Supreme Court justices coming all the way to this present court, 1 out of 4 of all Supreme Court justices in this nation's history were enslavers.
And I think she equated it to social media, how it's only a small percentage of people, of social media companies that control all these social media programs in which most people in America use. So that kind of defeats the point of saying, well, it was only about 2% of white Americans that owned enslaved blacks. Yeah, but that small percentage, allegedly, that small percentage did a lot of damage, and that damage is still seen today. So I just wanted to talk about that and just revisit that. I know Abby Phillips, the host of Night News, whatever that segment was called, Newsnight, she actually went back and made another statement regarding Jillian Michaels' comments and how they were inappropriate on another episode of CNN. And I'm glad she did that. That was appropriate. That was what she should have done. Speaking of bigotry, another story that came across my desk today, or that I came across, was Snoop Dogg. So Snoop Dogg, he is under fire. I mean, Snoop Dogg seems to be in the news for all the wrong reasons these days, starting with his choice to go to help with the current president's inauguration party, one of the parties or whatever. But anyways, he was featured on the It's Giving podcast, and he was talking about when he took his grandson to see the movie Lightyear, which is based off of the Buzz Lightyear toy from Toy Story. And there's a scene in this movie where you have a woman who is in a same gender-loving or same-sex relationship with another woman, and they have a child, and then there's a scene where they kiss. This is an animated film. That was a controversial scene that many people were not cool with. They said, why are you trying to introduce all this gay stuff into our kids' cartoons? We don't want to see that. Here's the deal. Gay people exist.
Yes.
All right? You might call them a minority population, but gay people exist. So there's that. Snoop Dogg was pretty much saying on this podcast that when that scene came up in the theater, his grandson was asking him questions about it, and he felt like he didn't want to answer those questions, and he feels that a lot of same-sex relationships are being introduced into children's programming.
They putting it everywhere.
Yeah.
I took my grandson to see what was a movie with Buzz Light.
Toy Story?
Not that one, but
the new Buzz. The Lightyear. I think it's called Lightyear.
Yeah, with Keke Palmer's in that movie.
Okay.
She plays like the daughter. So we watching it, and the lady, which is Kiki's mama, they move on into the space years. They move down the line. They're like, man, she had a baby with a woman. Well, my grandson in the middle of the movie like, Papa Snoop, how she have a baby with a woman? She a woman. Oh, shit. I didn't come in for this. I just came to watch the goddamn movie. Hey, man, watch the movie. They just said she had a baby. They both women. How did she have a baby? Shh. The movie ain't over with. So it's like, I'm scared to go to the movies now. Like, y'all throwing me in the middle of shit that I don't have an answer for.
What'd you tell them?
Watch the movie. Eat this popcorn. Shh.
You said, we don't know. We don't know.
It threw me for a loop. I'm like, what part of the movie was this? These are kids that we have to show that at this age. Like,
that part.
they're going to ask questions.
Yeah.
They are going to ask. I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
All right. That's his prerogative. My thing is this, and the It's Giving podcast has since cut that part of the interview out of the podcast. So you can see it because that clip has been circulating online. However, it's not on the main podcast episode that's been cut. What my response is to that is that Snoop Dogg is an influential figure. Whether or not you like it, he's celebrities. A lot of them are influential figures. That is irresponsible of him to make a statement such as that. Even if he feels that way, he shouldn't be making a statement like that on a public platform. Another thing too, educate your grandson about it, because your grandson is going to see that in life. He's going to come across gay people. He may come across gay couples. So it's best to get ahead of it and explain what's going on. As far as kissing in the theater, it's not like it was some hardcore gay action in this child's film. Well, Lightyear, I wouldn't even say is a child's film, just animated film that children can watch. It wasn't some hardcore action. They just kissed. It's not that big of a deal. We've had people kissing in animated films, Little Mermaid, Aladdin. They kiss in those films too. It's not that big of a deal. No, it isn't a big deal. It shouldn't be a deal at all. Just, okay, they're showing affection. So there is that, but I think it's worth educating your grandson about that because it exists in the world, and it's better to get ahead of it and you educate him rather than someone else.
That's correct.
And that's it. Just say a quick lesson. Yes, there are women that marry other women and they adopt children, or there's a sperm donor and one of them carries a child. You can get into all that stuff. I can understand maybe you're trying to what's the word? You're trying to keep your grandchild's innocent. What am I trying to say? You're trying to preserve their innocence a bit longer. I get that, but there's a way you can explain it. Come on, Snoop, you're a rapper. You've found creative ways to deliver lines. You can still do that now.
No.
I'm just not buying it, but it shouldn't be a big deal. He shouldn't have said it on the podcast. And now you have many people within the gay collective that are upset with Snoop Dogg because of how he has acted or what he has said, because people within the gay collective, they get discriminated against all the time. I'm not with that discrimination. They should be allowed to exist and live and thrive. That's my take on that. So I don't think I encourage you all to watch the movie Lightyear. Lightyear is actually a pretty good film. I haven't seen it in a long time, but it really is a good film. I definitely enjoyed it, and I think I watched that like 2 times in 2 days. That's how much I really liked it. The storyline I thought was pretty strong, and it was cool seeing their depiction of that animated figure, what that animated figure would be like in real life. I hope I'm explaining it correctly, because it's very meta. You have Toy Story and the Buzz Lightyear action figure. So this movie is based off of who the action figure is based off of what this movie is about. So that's that. That's the best way I can explain it. But anyway, let's move on to the next thing. Speaking of explanations, there was, and I made some videos talking about it. However, there was this debate that happened in which these 20 black conservatives were trying to explain away their thoughts about black people and how they need to do better to Amanda Seales, who is a self-proclaimed black radical, on Jubilee. So they had this debate, 20 black conservatives versus Amanda Seales. And it was very interesting to watch. You had these black conservatives saying, they were explaining away reparations, saying why black Americans don't deserve reparations. They were talking about black on black crime. They were talking about systemic racism and oppression and how that's not that big of a deal. It was a lot of talking in circles. And you could see with these 20 black conservatives, they were very passionate about what they had to say. However, they weren't that informed. And that's something that is a big danger in society today. A lot of people are very passionate about topics, but they're not very informed about it. It's important that we read from different sources and that we understand what we're talking about before we deliver something. Me, when it comes to these podcast episodes, sometimes I'm not putting out podcast episodes in a timely manner or putting them out at all because I don't fully know a topic. I got on AVIOT Sunday Brew this past Sunday, the Sunday 2 days ago, and I was saying I don't really have much to talk about because I wasn't informed on a lot of different areas. I'm not going to come and talk about something that I do not know to a certain degree. All these topics I'm talking about today, I know what I'm covering. And it was very unfortunate to see these Black conservatives. I know there's this one guy, he's from Angola, and he was talking about how Black people need to focus on the violence in their communities as opposed to focusing on reparations. I made a video in response saying, well, if Black Americans had reparations and they had more money in their pocket, they had wealthier communities, then there would be less violence because violence is correlated with poverty. If you read, you would know. you would know. But I felt Amanda Seales, she held her own pretty well against these 20 Black conservatives. I would love to debate. I wouldn't debate on a platform like that, but I would love to debate people who are against, and it has to be productive, of course. I don't want any neo-Nazis on the other side of me, but I would love to debate people who are against the progress of Black people, because when you really speak to them, they don't know what they're talking about. They have very basic arguments, and sometimes the arguments are outdated and their claims are based on propaganda, false propaganda that isn't based in reality. So there's that. Speaking of reality, the reality situation is a lot of people need to stop playing around with serious topics. What I mean by that, there's this rapper by the name of Lil Yachty. He was on a Twitch stream not too long ago, and he's going to make a line making light of the late George Floyd, who was killed back in 2020 when all them protests was going on by Derek Chauvin, the police officer, when he had his knee on his neck. So Lil Yachty's going to go on his Twitch stream and he's going to rap a line, put my knee up on her neck, I went George Floyd. What kind of thing is that?
That's terrible.
This Black man had his life taken unjustly by law enforcement who was supposed to protect and serve. And you make light of that in a song lyric? Come on. Now, Steven Jackson, former NBA player, he was very upset with this. He made a video in response calling out Lil Yachty, saying it wasn't cool. He said that Lil Yachty has since apologized, but the damage is already done. There should have never been a situation where you're making a line like that. And also another thing too, a lot of people don't respect Black folk as it is. Lil Yachty's a Black young man. Black people making fun of their own trauma, for a lot of racists and bigots out there, this is only going to fuel them, and they're going to say, well, see, I can talk negatively about this Black issue, or I cannot pay attention to it because other Black people aren't paying attention to it. Other Black people don't care about this issue. It just gives them more fuel. So there should just be situations where these lines are not said. Black people are not making fun of themselves, not being self-depreciative, not going along with self-depreciating jokes that really have strong historical context. Now, we could make fun of the tambourine player at church. Okay, that's cool. But let's not make fun of why Black people decided to have separate churches in the first place, or why they have separate churches on Sundays.
And now for a quick commercial break.
Hey guys, as you can hear, we are unapologetic in our opinions. We may be politically incorrect or possibly wrong, but don't knock us for being ourselves and saying what many are too afraid to admit out loud. Anyways, if you have any thoughts or questions about our show, email us at chemistryproductions@gmail.com. That's K3MISTRY productions@gmail.com. We'll be sure to address whatever you have to say.
So there's that. Really unfortunate. I don't think it's... Some people really think shock value is creative or shock value is some sort of talent. To me, it just shows that you're not talented. If you have to rely on shock value in order to get a point across, you're not talented. You're just looking for a reaction.
Yes.
Anyways, let's get into updates. So, I wrote an article recently. I think I mentioned it on another platform before. I don't know if I think I mentioned it on AVIOT Sunday Brew. Yeah, I did this past Sunday. I wrote an article recently speaking on Lil Nas X, the singer slash certain outlets call him a rapper, but I don't see him as a rapper. I just see him as a singer because I haven't heard him rap on anything. I just heard him sing. But he has recently been in the news because he was parading down in Los Angeles in his underwear and some cowboy boots one night. People called law enforcement to come check in on him. He allegedly hit an officer. He was struggling, resisting arrest, and he was incarcerated, and he got treated for a drug overdose, and now he's still jailed, and he's been denied bail. So I was speaking on that, and I was connecting it to celebrities and drug use and certain risk factors. And I put that article out. It's the first article I wrote in a while because at the end of the day, the AVI podcast is the official podcast of Chemistry Productions. I say this spiel. Chemistry Productions is a media education company, and our purpose is to educate. So this article is called A Fallen Star, Lil Nas X Struggles with Drug Use. And this article is available on medium.com. I started a Substack for Chemistry Productions, so the article's on there as well. But I don't know how to navigate that platform too well just yet. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, my wife gave me advice to get a Substack for chemistry. So I have a Substack. Well, Chemistry Productions has a Substack, and the article's on there. It's also on medium.com. Please support the article. Please move it around. I have other articles in mind that I want to write about. I'm working on one right now dealing with bad boys and how women are attracted to bad boys. And I really think that's going to be a good article. But I'm very proud of myself for having done that because it's been a while since I've written. And part of the reason why is because I've been so bogged down in trying to create social media content for this platform and try to structure things correctly, run this podcast. It's been a lot. It's been a lot to do, but it is very satisfying work when the product gets out there and when you do get in conversation with people who enjoy your work and who want to be in community with you. So I appreciate everybody who supports the Chemistry Productions platform. I appreciate everyone who listens to the AVIOT podcast. And even though it's a little wonky when I'm putting out these episodes, I appreciate those of you who do listen and who support. Please spread the word about us, and we'll keep on keeping on week after week after week. So let's get into the topic of the day. All right. So I'm seeing that there's been some radioactive contamination of shrimp lately.
Wow.
So Food and Drug Administration is saying that there are radioactive shrimp out there. Cesium-137 is a soft, flexible, silvery white metal that becomes liquid near room temperature. And this has been found in shrimp that is being sold in Walmart under their Great Value brand. And I'm seeing right now there's some other shrimp that's being contaminated as well. That is not good.
No.
And the reason why I even go into this right here is we're living in interesting times. We're living in times where people are trying to rewrite history when it comes to slavery. We're living in times where people are downplaying atrocities such as the death of George Floyd. And we're living in times where certain food is not safe. And all I can say is for you all, and this is I guess this is more of the theme of the show, do your research. Do your research, all right? Make sure what you are consuming, whether it be food, whether it be writing, make sure what you're consuming is worthwhile. Make sure you know about what you're consuming. Make sure that you get multiple areas where you are multiple consume from multiple sources. There we go. So I feel bad for the shrimp eaters out there because this shrimp situation that's going on, but there are other healthy options. There are other shellfish that you can eat, and even there, there's always risk. But I think, and people are going to tell you like, that's why you need to be on a vegan diet. But listen, there's pesticides that they spray on plants, so that's not necessarily safe either. But it's good to read. It's good to notify yourselves. I'm notifying you of the radioactive shrimp that are out there. I think maybe we should just chill with eating shrimp in general. Or if you really have a shrimp craving, look into the shrimp that are safe. Look into the brands that are safe. Maybe Costco, but I'm gonna chill with eating shrimp right now because, yeah, that's not cool. Having radioactive chemicals in your food, obviously that's a risk factor for cancer. Obviously that's a risk factor for other health ailments. But yeah, you gotta read. You gotta know what's going on. Make sure what you're consuming is good. Make sure that you're well informed, and that's all I can do is help keep you all well informed of what's out there. But anyways, I thank y'all for listening to this podcast episode right here. The next podcast episode, we're going to be talking about some different topics. I actually had the topics in this episode right here in the tank for a little over a week because I wanted to talk about them, but I just never got the chance to sit down and actually record. So I'm recording now. We're going to put out this podcast episode right here. Make sure to support this, and we will see you next time. Peace.
So go a little something like this. That's AVIOT.